Hello friends, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink with more cards using some of the new products from Simon Says Stamps Dream Big release that came out this week. And I thought I would show or at least one of my ways of mass producing. Decided to make multiple cards, and I do everything in steps and all at the same time. So because these cards are focusing on die cuts, I'm using the Lemon Zest wafer die set. So the first thing I do is either I'm die cutting all white cardstock, like my last video, or if I'm using color cardstock, I pull out all of my packs of cardstock in the colors I want to use, and I first go for all the scraps I have. I keep all my scraps. I don't really get rid of any scraps anymore. It used to be kind of a rule of thumb to keep, a certain size. You don't want too many. Nowadays, I keep them all because they work for little die cuts. So that's what I do first, is I take my scraps, and since I'm doing multiples, I trim down a bunch of pieces to the size of the wafer die. So this takes a little bit of time, but in the end it makes everything go a lot quicker. So I decided kind of off the cuff that I was going to do 4 cards. So I was like kind of figuring out how many pieces I'm going to need. I was like, well, I'll do 2 lemons a card, etc., etc. So just kind of figuring out roughly how much I was going to need. And then I just kind of do little piles of my cardstock for each wafer die. And this also comes in handy with there's die sets that have a lot of wafer dies, like floral sets, etc., that have multiple leaves and layers and all that sort of stuff. This applies to that as well. Getting everything kind of ready ahead of time and just having everything in either little piles or little containers or whatever, it just makes it all go a lot faster. The only time I don't cut down cardstock is for something really, really tiny, like that little tiny flower center wafer die. I wasn't going to bother cutting a bunch of little small pieces. I just keep that one scrap and I'll move that little wafer die around every time I run it through, so I get all my little flower centers die cut. To me, that's a waste of time to trim down such tiny little pieces. And then I either use I have these little pinch bowls there on the right. They're meant for spices. I bought these at a home goods store years ago. You guys have seen them in a few videos. I have kitty cat ones, I have puppy dog ones, and I have ones that look like cupcake liners. Anyway, little containers, a muffin tin works really well. Just something to contain all of the die cut pieces so that those aren't getting lost amongst everything else. So I die cut I die cut each set, and then I put the pieces in a container and then continue the process just over and over again. And it's mindless repetition. So I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6. I was using the new platform setup for the die cutting. Gotta say, I really like it. I showed it in my last haul video. A lot of people have been asking. Total fan of it. Think it's great. Haven't used all the pieces of that platform system yet, but yeah, it's great. So anywho, all my die cutting was done. So now it's a matter of some assembling, just the basic stuff, like adhering the flower centers to the flowers. So that was just simple. Laid out all the flowers, put a dab of craft tacky glue in the center, glued all the centers to it. Set those aside, let them dry. The next part is adhering this piece to the lemon. It just gives it that little extra bit of, dimension, which I am loving. So went along, adhered all that. And then for the little kind of dots, the highlights, all I did was take more scraps of white cardstock and glue them behind. Simple. So I would just trim down these scraps with scissors. These little narrow white strips, I always keep those, especially because you guys see me use them. I'll use them to stamp a sentiment on, for little things like this, little die cuts, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And with the amount of wafer dies and the amount of cards I make, I'm not getting buried in scraps. That used to be a thing. Now I find that I go through all my scraps, and yet I will not cut into a full piece of cardstock unless the scraps are used up. So anyway, did all my die cutting, did all the assembling, set all that aside. my next step was to emboss some green cardstock. I'm using the new Rhythmic embossing folder. And with that Spellbinders plate system and the Simon, specifically the Simon Says stamp embossing folders, because different brands are different thicknesses, etc. But with this, I find the platform A, the folder with cardstock, and a cutting plate is what works perfectly for me for embossing. And I did lightly mist each piece of cardstock with water before running it through. That just helps give it more, it gives more of the impression. You get a better embossing from the folder, as well as if you find that your cardstock is cracking or you're not getting enough of the impression, like it just kind of looks a little meh, try adding just a light mist of water. It doesn't take much. That just softens the fibers in the cardstock. So I did all of that. I set those panels aside to dry because they're a little bit damp from spraying them with water. And then I grabbed more scraps of white cardstock, and I'm stamping a sentiment from this Big and Bold stamp set with Simon's Citrine ink. And then I die cut those with the coordinating wafer dies. And then I decided I wanted to spray the embossed backgrounds. Could have just left them as is, but I was just like, meh, why not? Let's add some extra splatter and texture. So I put these in my splat box. I've got my flour sackcloth just to contain any potential overspray, because I can be bad for that. And I'm spraying these backgrounds with Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide Spray. I love this shade of green. I love all my distress colors, but there's something about Rustic Wilderness. You guys have seen me use it a bajillion times. So I sprayed the backgrounds with that. And then again, I'm going to set these aside to dry. And while those are like fully drying, I'm going to stamp the insides of my cards. So my card bases are going to be top folding A2 cards, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm stamping the insides with sentiments from the CZ Designs Spring in My Step set. I've shown this one also a million times. This Paper Hug sentiment is just one of my favorites. So I stamped that with that same citrine ink. And then I stamped a little companion, my brain stopped, companion sentiment from that same set with Simon's Field ink, just using acrylic blocks. It was just quicker this way. And then my backgrounds were dry, so I covered the back of them with Simon's Big Mama foam tape just to give it a little bit of dimension. Don't need a whole lot. I had assembled one card front just to give me an idea where I'm going to place everything, taking that time to do a little bit of fiddling. Once I had that set out, and that'll basically be my template, I can now assemble the rest of the cards. So put all the foam tape on the back of the panels, adhere these to the card bases. Once these are adhered into place, I can then start adhering all of the little die cut elements that I had assembled at the beginning. So I'm going to assemble them by gluing down the little branch and then add the leaves. And this goes a lot quicker. Once I've got the first one down, I know where everything's going to go. It doesn't have to be perfect. They don't all have to be exact, but it just starts going quickly. So adhered everything with craft tacky glue. The sentiment, I put a foam square behind that and a bit of glue to get that adhered and popped into place. I adhered the little blooms with a bit of glue. And like I always say, you can always stop here. But I'm going to add more splatter because that's what I do. So I grabbed my little palette, and then 2 colors of distress paint. I've got Squeeze Lemonade, which was, I could have just used Squeeze Lemonade, honestly, but it was a little too light. Mustard Seed's a little too dark. Mix them together, you get the perfect shade of yellow. So that's what I did. I put both those paints down, and I also added a little bit of water. You don't really need water with distress paints when I do splattering, but I wanted to water these down a little bit, just because. So mix them together with my fan brush, watered them down a bit, and then splattered these onto the background. And I also splattered right over the sentiment, the lemon, everything, because I was like, why not? It just gives it that little extra something. So once I had splattered these cards, I just set them aside to dry. And then after I'm done all the splatter, of course, I'm going to wash off my brush, wipe off my palette. Distress paint does dry permanent. You especially want to make sure to wash your brush out. So did all of that, let the, my brush, my palette dry, my cards, all that stuff. And then my final little thing, I'm going to add bling because this is just what I do. So I've got some Trinity Stamps Tic Tac Heart Jelly Drops. They're just white hearts in different sizes. Love those. I've used up like quite a few of these over the last like year or two. So I have those, and I also have some luminous lemon baubles, so some like lemon yellow pearls. And I'm just going to adhere those. And same thing, I did one card first, figured out where I wanted to place everything, and then once I had that done, the other three I just copied, rough the placement, etc., and it just came together and it was all done. And then I paired these cards with some dandelion envelopes from Simon. And here is the close-up with the detail of that embossing folder. Love. And the other side of that embossing folder, like the reverse side of the cardstock, is also really nice. I'm gonna have to use this in more videos. But anyway, as always, I will have links below the video to my blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies I used, picture links in the blog post, etc. So you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I very much appreciate it. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.